They were able to render obedience where obedience could be rendered. Where it could not be rendered, they were willing to die. Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God. So now let's just spend the final few moments just drawing from this just a few observations. Really, these observations are, I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4 different observations or the same observations stated 3 or 4 different ways because there's so much overlap here. But let's just take a look at this. First of all, the first thing that I see is that I see just clearly and emphatically that the early church took an incredibly positive view of civil government. There is no doubt that the opinion that the early church has for the governing authorities, the earthly governing authorities, is overwhelmingly positive in the New Testament. We could look at, for example, what the words of Peter in 1 Peter chapter 2. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. That same emperor would crucify Peter. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, to show perfect courtesy towards all people. We could read the longer passage, Romans 13 there. We could read the other passage in 1 Timothy 2. All of those are written by men who are writing about the emperor at that time, Nero, who would be persecuted and eventually executed by the very same emperor that they're writing about. The early church took an overwhelmingly positive view of civil government. Now, let me just draw one contrast. A contrast between a view of government in the New Testament and a view of government in the Old Testament. If we were to contrast, and this is perhaps, this is a homework assignment. You can go home this week and do a Bible study and contrast the view of government in the Old Testament versus the view of government in the New Testament. The Old Testament government, the books of Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, we have an overwhelmingly negative view because those governments were largely corrupt. Largely they were run by evil men, wicked men like Ahab and others, and the view is largely negative. In the New Testament, we have governments that are run by just as wicked people, Nero, yet the view towards government is overwhelmingly positive. Isn't that interesting? That the New Testament writers took upon themselves to take the words of Jesus and to take them at heart, to say, we as the people of God, we will adopt a positive view of the government over us. Now, we might say, well, that was their government, and it was easy for them to say that. Oh, really? You mean the one that put them to death? You mean the one that persecuted the early church with such bloodthirsty violence? That same government? Yeah, that's the same one that they adopt this positive view towards. So that should be the default. The default of the Christian today should be a positive view of the government over us. As Paul will say, as Peter will say, God has created those bodies to punish evildoers and to reward good. And for that reason, you honor God when you honor them. But then secondly, let's look to the next page. And here's where I think there's a lot of overlap in what we're looking at, but that's okay. But look at this phrase here. Government is a blessing and an extension of God's gracious and sovereign rule. Therefore, we owe submission in all areas that are not in direct conflict with God's commands. That's a long phrase there. Let's read it again. Government is a blessing and an extension of God's gracious and sovereign rule. Therefore, we owe submission in all areas that are not in direct conflict with God's commands. Is that not precisely what Jesus said? Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. If there is submission that is Caesar's, give it to him. Don't withhold from Caesar the submission that is rightfully his, but then render unto God the submission that is due him. Now, we can see so many examples of this very same thing in which the people of God render unto, and I'll use metaphorically Caesar here, because there's lots of different rulers in place, but we see so many examples of God's people rendering unto the pagan, godless leader a submission that is not just, in the words of Paul, eye-pleasing. Not just lip service, but true and genuine submission. How many stories do you think we could point to? Do you think we could look to Daniel and the story of Daniel, who served the emperor with excellence until it came the point that he had to stop praying to God, which that was the point that he was no longer willing to give or render or give back to the emperor what was due the emperor. He was willing to do all of that up until that point. Or we could take a look at the story of Joseph. We could take a look at the words of the prophets. Startling are the occasions in the prophets in which Israel is rebuked for not giving Babylon total submission. Ezekiel 13, you can read that at home, the whole chapter. Ezekiel 13, we can look to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, on several occasions, rebukes Israel because they are not properly submitting to Babylon. So we have that on the one hand, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. But then on the other hand, we have render unto God or give back to God what is due unto God. And so we see this model that is modeled for us in Scripture of the citizen of a kingdom of earth that gives unto the Caesar all that is rightfully the Caesar's, but they clearly know where the boundary lies. They clearly know where that ends. And so, again, we can look to Joseph. Here's a good one to look at. This is an example that I find particularly helpful. It's the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, I think it was about 2 summers ago that we were studying through that portion of Daniel's prophecy, and we were looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they're taken out there to the countryside, and they're told to bow down to this great big idol of me. And it's at that point that they won't do that. And so they stand alone. But then, as they're thrown into that fiery furnace, remember how there was the repeated description of their clothing? And how that description showed beyond doubt that they were wearing Babylonian clothing, not Hebrew clothing. And so they were willing to say, look, there's nothing that offends God for me to dress like the Babylonians. And so I will do that. I will give that submission. And then they're thrown into the fiery furnace. You know what's interesting to me? In that story of the fiery furnace, there's 2 commands that Nebuchadnezzar gives. The first command is, when the music stops, bow down. That's the one they're not willing to obey. What's the second command? Remember? Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, come out. You ever think about that command? What if they had said, come and get us? What if they said, you put us in here, you come and get us out? Because we're having a good old time in here. We're in here fellowshipping with the second person of the Trinity. Thank you very much. These flames aren't hurting us. We don't even smell like smoke in here. It's a whole lot better in here than out there. So we'll tell you what, Nebi, come in here and get us. They didn't do that, did they? They were able to render obedience where obedience could be rendered. Where it could not be rendered, they were willing to die. That's a basic model. Render unto Caesar the things that are due him. Render unto God the things that are due unto God. But then next on the back page, look at this. Christians owe a debt to government. It is not the same debt owed to God. Never confuse the 2 debts. So we owe a debt to government. Clearly in the passage, Jesus' implication here is you are living under certain benefits of the civil government over you. And so clearly you owe something for those benefits that you've received. In fact, Jesus is most likely teaching in the temple courtyard at this very moment. And who paid for the temple? Herod. Ultimately, the Romans paid for the very temple in which Jesus is being confronted probably at that very moment. So there's a certain debt owed to the government. There's a different debt owed to God. Never confuse the 2 debts. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render unto God the things that are God. What debt do we owe God? Well, we could start here. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. We could start there. Is that the same debt owed to Caesar? That's not the debt owed to Caesar. You see, the coin was an illustration that Jesus is using to say, the debt that Caesar is trying to exact from you is the debt of worship. Never give that to him. In fact, that would be the crux of the matter for the early church. Because the Roman Empire, for all of its faults, was extremely tolerant of religious views. Extremely tolerant of religious views. All the kingdoms that they conquered, they all had different religions. And the Romans, for the most matter, allowed them to continue. The only thing was they had to acknowledge what? Caesar's Lord. Other than that, we don't care. Worship who you want. Just Caesar's Lord, but worship whatever else. And that was the crux of the matter for the early church, that would not say Caesar is Lord. That was not the debt due to Caesar, and that's the debt they would not pay to Caesar. They were told to render to Caesar what's rightfully his. Caesar doesn't rightfully own your worship. Jesus holds up the coin. And of course he says, whose likeness is this? Had Jesus gone further, and again, we don't want to put words in Jesus' mouth, but I think that this is Jesus' train of thought here. When he says, whose likeness is on the coin? And they say Caesar's. Isn't the strong implication, whose likeness is on you? Caesar's image is on the coin. The coin has Caesar's face stamped on it. Therefore it's his. Whose image is stamped on you? Whose image are you made in? Therefore, don't confuse these two debts. Don't give unto Caesar the love, devotion, and worship that is due to Christ and Christ alone. To the one who owns you, who created you, stamped you with his image, and then recreated you in the likeness of his Son. Don't confuse those two debts, because, lastly, we must always make certain that our rendering to Caesar does not bleed over into our rendering to God. Out of place and even contrary to the gospel is the intermingling of patriotism and faith. You say, oh, preacher, you're not getting on that bandwagon again. Because we were just on this one a few weeks ago. Well, this is where the text has brought us once again. Because isn't this clearly the strong implication of Jesus' words, is to say, there is a realm in which you owe dedication to the state. But that dedication to the state must never bleed over into your dedication to the kingdom. And you must always diligently keep those separate and apart from one another. Now, tragically, we live in a cultural context, a church cultural context, in which the bleeding together of these two renderings has taken place over a long period of time, to such a degree now that there are, I think, millions of those who attend worship on Sunday morning who would say emphatically that they believe in Jesus and they love Jesus and they belong to Jesus, yet they really cannot articulate a gospel that is devoid of mom, apple pie, and stars and stripes forever. That somehow the kingdom of Christ has become so infused with the kingdom of the United States that in their thinking the two are inseparable. That the kingdom of God certainly has found its culmination in the stars and stripes forever. And so for those who have intermingled those two realities, to articulate or to even comprehend a gospel that is devoid of rendering to Caesar, not only becomes difficult, but actually starts to chip away from even their understanding of the gospel itself. This is why I find so offensive the idea. I know the first church I pastored, I had to stand up and preach every Sunday with an American flag behind me. That's why I find that idea so offensive. Not that the stars and stripes are offensive in any way, but it is to say, I am rendering to God what is God's, and that's not His. That's a blessing from Him, but that's not the kingdom of God. Think of it this way. Imagine right now, if someone were to walk in and to join us on a Sunday morning, and as we got to know them a little bit, they began to profess to us just a deep love for the Scriptures, a deep love for the things of God, a conversion that was convincing and true, and we just sensed that we are in the presence of a brother or a sister. But then as we got to know them a little bit more, we found out that they had just recently moved here from a country that hates the United States. And they were to eventually say to us, I love Jesus, but I hate America. I hate everything America stands for. Could they be accepted among us? Or would that be a stone of stumbling for us? Would that be a rock of offense? In our hearts, would stars and stripes forever be too intermingled with the kingdom of God for us to be able to love and accept a brother or a sister who was not of the same belief? Don't misunderstand me. Don't mishear me. We're not at all indicating here that we're not grateful for the blessings that God has bestowed upon us. And this, we talked this past Wednesday night of spiritual privilege, of the place of spiritual privilege. We thank God for that. We're just taking Jesus' words seriously when He says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Render to God the things that are God, and don't confuse the two. And they marveled at Him and turned and left. Don't you just get this sense there? In my mind, I can picture that they're opening their mouth to reply, and then they realize, I don't know what to say. How do you answer that? And so they go away, marvel. They came to test Him. But who was really tested? That's the last point I'll make this morning. They came to examine Christ. They were the ones examined. Never forget that, brothers and sisters. Christ examines you. He sees everything. He knew their hypocrisy. He knows your heart. He examines us. There is no hidden sin. There is no hidden sin from God. He knows us. He examines us. And I think that's a fitting way to end, to say, always remind yourself of that, brothers and sisters. He examines you. He examines your heart. He knows you.